Today I want to talk about the Florida housing crisis, but first off, let me introduce myself. My name is Troy Funk, and it's Funk, F-U-N-K, Funk. I am a licensed real estate broker in the state of Florida. I've been a resident of Florida, and I've been in sales going on 40 years in Florida, and I've learned a few things, and my focus is to give you some value. And if I give you value, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber, and certainly hit that bell so we can stay in touch. So first off, where am I at? I am in Santa Barbara, California, place that I grew up. I went to elementary school here, middle school, and part of my high school here. And I'm going to take you to the place that I grew up and talk about the unaffordability of housing, and especially how that relates to Florida, because Florida feels like we're in a crisis right now, especially for affordable housing. And people are waiting for the prices to come down. They're waiting for this market to crash or values to come down because they went up way too fast, too quick. And how does that relate to Santa Barbara, California? Well, I want to put the two together because I have always had a passion for real estate, and I studied real estate ever since I was probably, I'd say, 10 years old. I knew the market really well, especially here in Santa Barbara, and I've been tracking the Santa Barbara market ever since. And also, of course, I know the Florida market, and I work all over the state of Florida. I work with some attorneys that assign me pre-foreclosure listings, so I'm traveling all over the state, marketing properties. I am a real estate broker, and as such, we sell real estate all over the state of Florida. But this market has changed so much, especially in the last couple years, and the market went way up, and people are expecting the market to crash because it doesn't feel like housing's affordable anymore, and it feels very much like we're in a crisis. You know, what happens if you can't afford to buy housing, and especially if you can't afford to rent housing? And it is sad. I'm in California, and they obviously have a severe homeless problem here that we also have in Florida, but not to the extent that California has, and is partially that responsible for the fact that we don't have affordable housing. Well, it's a factor, and here's the real situation, the reality of life here, and it's not always nice, it's not always kind, but here's the facts. The working poor are increasing in our society, and the rich get richer, and it just feels like that's the way it's been, and it feels like that divide is continuing to happen more. It feels like the middle class is going away. And it's really hard if you're looking to buy a home and they're just not affordable. You know, what's going to happen? Well, you just hope that things will self-correct, that property values will come down, they become affordable again, and you can buy, or just in fact that the property values will come down. Well, today I want to give you a completely different perspective on what's possible, because I am a YouTube creator now. I didn't think of that as a job title, but I'm really enjoying this process of making YouTube videos and providing information, because I get so much feedback, and the feedback that I really love is just that you're just so honest. And as I said, I have a little bit of experience behind me, and I'm glad to share that. But I want to talk about how that relates to unaffordable housing and expecting things to get better. Well, I have a good friend. His name is Max Mara, and he is an agent in my office, and he's Italian, very strong-willed, a lot of integrity, get right to the point kind of person. He's a great guy. He's a very honest person, but he's a straight shooter. And Max and I recently had lunch, and Max said something to me that was really profound, and that was, Troy, you know the best time to buy real estate? And I said, that's a good question. What do you think it is? And he said, when you can afford it. And I'm like, yeah, that makes the most sense. When do you buy real estate? When you can afford it. I know a lot of people think in reverse order. They think, well, we want to buy real estate when the situation becomes perfect for us. The market is right, the prices seem low, and you know, none of us have that crystal ball. I know, as I mentioned, the word real estate crash SEOs really well if you're making YouTube videos. You're going to get a lot of hits if you talk about a real estate crash, because people want to hear that information. They feed into the idea that property values are going to go down. And here's the sad story. They may not go down, and that's partially my explanation of why I'm in Santa Barbara, California right now, because they have not really experienced that. Now, when the market did crash back in 06, 08 area, yes, the property values did correct. They became lower, but they were still unaffordable, not to most people, and as such, the window of opportunity to buy real estate diminished. Now, we were fortunate in that my father was a vet. He was in the service, and as such, when we lived in California when I was very little, my parents were able to buy their first house, no money down, as a vet, and that still is possible today. If you're a vet, first off, thank you for your service, and also know that as a vet, you can secure 100% financing if you qualify on real estate. This is a great opportunity to buy if you're a vet. So my parents purchased their first home, 100%, no money down, and we lived in Walnut Creek at that time, and we had lived in Carmel, and we lived in some really beautiful places, and to have a brand new house built in Antioch, California. Now, Antioch is the Bay Area of San Francisco. The house doubled in value in about 5 years, and from the money my parents made, we actually won the lottery. I didn't realize it at the time, but my dad got promoted to Santa Barbara, California, and my parents bought a house there. From the money they earned from their first house, that was a sizable down payment to then purchase a house in Santa Barbara. Now, back in those days, you could buy, when we were looking for a home here in Santa Barbara, I remember looking at about 15 houses for sale that were in the price point that my parents could afford. But you know what's strange is right now, if you're looking in Santa Barbara and you want to look at 15 homes for sale under $2 million, you're not going to find it. Or back then, the price point was about anywhere from 80 to 90 was where my parents were looking to spend, and the house that they purchased was $87,000. That was a lot of money to spend on a house. It just was such a stretch, but we were lucky and they ended up with an asset here in Santa Barbara. So I'm going to take you to that neighborhood and talk about affordability, because it's very applicable to Florida right now, and the mindset people are thinking of, the prices are too high, let's just wait for the market to crash. And yet I want to reflect back on my friend Max saying the best time to buy is when you can afford it, because that equation happened. That's not always the case. And I think of people that can afford to buy property and they choose not to. They just don't. They're waiting for something else to happen. They're actually taking a calculated risk that in the future the situation will get better. Now, here's where you can lose big time on that. Let's just say you're wrong, and I know a lot of people are wrong, and that's why they're mad, because they took a risk of not buying when they could afford to buy a property. And then what happened? Property values went up to the roof, and now they can't afford to buy anymore. And the only answer there is just hope for everything to crash. Well, it may not crash. I mean, we haven't seen Santa Barbara crash. I mean, when you look at real estate, you're buying an asset. And when you look at real estate as an asset, you have to think of it as a long-term situation. I know a lot of people are focused on the immediate bubble of what may happen, may not happen in the real near future. But long-term, when you are buying real estate or when you're looking to relocate to some area, you have two choices to make. You either buy or you rent. Now, is renting a good decision? Well, I think we know the answer to that, because when you rent, you're paying off somebody else's mortgage, and you're doing it with your labor, your income. And the sad thing is, right now in Florida, I have never seen so many apartment buildings under construction right now. And what I see with that is, I see a lot of poverty coming up from this, because these are people that if you ended up renting a property and you end up renting the rest of your life, you're going to be sort of a financial slave to somebody else. Somebody else is going to determine what your rent's going to be, and it's just hard to get ahead if you don't own your own house. Owning your own house, your own real estate, is a foundation for wealth. And like I said, I look back and grateful my parents were able to buy their first home, even with no money down. which equated to owning a house here in Santa Barbara that's worth, well, I'll show you the neighborhood. You can see what it looks like. But that was a foundation for wealth. And when you don't make that decision, you know, you could be the majority of the working poor the rest of your life, where you're going to be working to pay somebody else's asset off. Doesn't make sense. So you want to time it just right. The market's going to crash. You know, I don't know that. It hasn't, and I'll just explain that. This market hasn't been crashing. And Florida, seriously, we are not seeing the best areas crashing. We're seeing price adjustments, and how far will that go? Well, it's all a factor of supply and demand, and this is where a lot of buyers mess up. They think that what determines value is affordability. If they can't afford it, therefore the property values must go down. Not true. Affordability has nothing to do with the value of real estate. Santa Barbara proves that because Santa Barbara hasn't been affordable for the last 40 years. I mean, we were fortunate, my parents were fortunate to get in at the tail end when they were able to buy a home. But when they sold our house in Santa Barbara 5 years later, it actually took two doctors, or it was a husband and wife, and they did ultrasound. They worked at the hospital. They made a lot of money, but this couple, they didn't have kids, and it took their income to be able to purchase our house. And they still live there today. And since that point, they've had kids, raised their family, but they're still living in that home. And it was a good investment for them. But it just did seem that affordability, you know, if real estate's not affordable, then how can real estate keep going up? And how is that fair? Well, it's not fair, but here's the issue. Price is not a factor of affordability. That's where a lot of people misconceive the idea that affordability determines value. Not true. What determines value of anything is supply and demand. So you have an area like this, Santa Barbara, absolutely beautiful place, a place that a lot of people want to live. The demand is extremely high, and there's only so much real estate, especially here in Santa Barbara. Now, Santa Barbara has the mountains and the beach and the cliffs, and there's only an envelope of so much property that can be built here. And for the most part, there's really no new construction here at all because the land's not available. And yet, the demand has increased. The population, since we moved out of this area, it feels like it's doubled. And property values, well, they've basically gone 10x from where my parents sold their home. I mean, the house they sold is worth 10 times more than what they sold it for. So, you know, this idea that I'm going to wait to buy real estate, I'm going to wait for the crash. You know, the reality is the best time to buy is when you can afford it. And then when you can afford it, hold on to that asset. That's an asset. I don't get excited about market corrections or adjustments or values, because in the long run, you own an asset. You own an asset that can be paid off, and that could be a big factor determining what side of the fence are you going to be on. Are you going to be the working poor the rest of your life, paying somebody else's mortgage off, or are you going to have an asset where, you know, you can hand down and have security? So owning's the right time. Best time to buy is when you can afford it. But at this point, let me take you to my old neighborhood, and I want to talk about some real stats on values and what this looks like and what to consider if you're thinking of buying a property. And is this a good time or not? I think always a good time to buy is when you can afford it. With that, let me take you to my old neighborhood.
I'm in the neighborhood that I grew up in. Actually, I'm about a block away, but I want to talk real estate for a little bit. And what does real estate look like in Santa Barbara? So this house behind me sold the end of 20 for about $885, and then the next year the house next door sold for $500,000 more. Well, that's a big jump. $500,000 in a year. Where have prices gone? Because, you know, ideally when you think prices go way up that fast, they have to go back down. Well, they haven't been going back down. In fact, they've just kind of stabilized here right now. But $1.4 million for a home in this neighborhood. Wow. And you're thinking, how big are these homes? They're less than 1,400 square feet, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. This is actually entry point price point for Santa Barbara right now. You're at $1.4 million for a house to live here in Santa Barbara. And people are like, well, the prices, you know, if they go up, they have to come down. What goes up must come down. Not always in real estate. I mean, in a, you know, again, it's that supply and demand. Our population in the world is getting more intense, and the other issue being that areas that people want to live appreciate. They're in high demand. So when we talk about corrections in the marketplace and property values going down, it's all subjective to location. Where is the property at? Every location is different. Yes, we are seeing prices adjust. I think we're going to see some bigger corrections, and I'm going to take you into San Francisco in my next video and kind of talk about a market that's definitely adjusting down in a big way and reasons why that's happening. But the idea, okay, when do you buy property? You buy property when you can afford it. Well, I think about that idea because when I purchased my home, I could afford it. It was certainly very easy to do, and then life changes, things happen, right? And in that time since I purchased the home, I had a divorce, I started a new business, and it set me back. It set me back to where I certainly wouldn't be able to buy a home during all that time, but I was lucky because I already had a home. It didn't matter. If I was a renter and I had those experiences happen, you know, a divorce and a new business and life changes, I would be sunk. I mean, the house that I own has been a godsend to me. It's helped me financially, and it's an asset. So this whole idea of waiting, I think, is really subjective. Everybody's needs are different, but again, I'm going to hang on to that. Buy when you can afford it. And I also hang on the idea that real estate is an asset, and there's going to be market corrections. We're going to see ups and downs in the marketplace, but does that mean if you hold it long term and you keep it as an asset, you're doing pretty well. So we're just about to actually approach the street that I used to live on, which is called Via El Cuadro. And I understand the cuadro in Spanish means picture. And what was neat about this street, and I'll give a shot of what it looks like looking down the street, but this is a really beautiful street. It's a tree-lined street. And what was fun about these homes is this house was a mid-century built home, and it had the whole back of the house was a wall of glass, and had wood ceilings. It was a split plan, so my bedroom actually had its own sliding glass door, and it was just an amazing house to live in. And I'm lucky. Like I said, I'm lucky because I got to experience that, but also got a good education in real estate and what's good to, you know, a good time. We're walking by my old house right now, and it looks like it had a tree damage situation happen to it. But that's a house that meant a lot to me growing up, and I'm grateful that we were here when we were here. But I want to show you one more house, and then again, just kind of conclude this video with the idea of Florida real estate, waiting to buy. Is that a good idea? And what does the crash look like? And what about affordable housing? Well, as I said, I don't know if we're going to see affordable housing. I think the vision is that you work with what you've got. Now, I did another video that talks about how to find affordable housing in Florida, and it has some core ideas on what to look at if you're thinking, you know, what else is possible when you can't afford to buy the home in the area that you want. So with that, I'll show you one more comp, so to speak, in this neighborhood to give you an idea of values, and that this market, we're in a very healthy market here in this area, but I'm going to show you a market in California in another video that's not healthy, and why, what are the factors that make that market different than this market, even though we're in California. So I'm in a little cul-de-sac right around the house that I was in, and this house recently sold, and I'll put the information there. And it's funny because in the MLS comments it states the last time this house was on the market was about 40 years ago, and I remember that because I was here and I remember when the house was on the market. But the house behind me recently sold, which is fun because the house just a couple houses away was a house that I used to mow the yard every other week for, and I made $10 for mowing the yard on that grass, and that was my form of income. And it was a good life living here in Santa Barbara. So I hope I've given you some value today in just opening and just trying to discuss some other ideas of a process when you're thinking about the challenges that we're having in Florida with affordability. And is waiting a good idea? And I strongly suggest that it always depends, but buy when you can afford it. I think that's a safe investment if you're hanging on to that investment long term. So again, my name is Troy Funk. If I've added value, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.